Do you want to speed farm and push the pit efficiently while also breezing through other content? Then this is the build for you. Welcome to the Maxroll channel, I'm your host Mippy, and this is my Heartseeker guide for Rogue for Diablo 4's Season 4. For the gear, we're going to discuss the bow variant of the build, which is used for farming, where we try to reach the 13 frames per attack breakpoint. If you do not know what frames per attack means in this regard, check out the attack speed and frame calculator that is linked in the description below. You can input your attack speed values there to figure out how to efficiently reach the desired 13 frames per attack breakpoint. On the bow, we temper vulnerable damage to scale our victimized damage further and chance to cast Heartseeker twice for more procs. We use the aspect of Moonrise because it increases our attack speed in cap 1, and it also increases our basic skill damage. For the gems, we use vulnerable damage in the farming variant, and in the push variant, where you use the crossbow, you can socket in 2 basic skill gems, which are the topazes, which is a very marginal damage increase over sapphires if you have a certain amount of vulnerable damage, which you will reach when you have vulnerable damage tempered everywhere. The crossbow should only be used in the pushing variant, as it is less attacks per second, but more damage per hit. And in the pushing, this matters more because we try to splash damage from adds into the boss, and the amount of hits we can deal to them is limited. On the daggers, we want vulnerable damage again to scale our victimized damage, and Caltrops duration here is very good because it increases not only the duration, but also the damage that we deal to the enemies standing inside of Caltrops. We use elements here because we want to benefit from the 30% multiplier when we are on physical. And on the other dagger, we use the same tempers and we use edge masses, which is guaranteed to be active at 20% all the time because we do not spend resources with Heartseeker. On the helmet, we use Harlequin's Crest. If you do not have Harlequin's Crest, you can use a helmet with Dexterity, Max Life, and Lucky Hit Chance. And the Might aspect, you have to adjust the Paragon just a little bit. And for that, I have noted down the starter variant in the planner as well. As the gems in our armor, we use Maximum Life because that increases our effective HP very significantly. If you feel like you're never dying, you can also swap out a few of the rubies for emeralds, which would give dexterity to increase your damage slightly. On the chest, gloves, pants, and boots, we need to distribute the lucky hit chance to apply a crowd control tempers, which we do in the following way to have an optimal ratio of clear time and also boss staggering time. We use chance to stun on either of the pieces. We use smoke grenade duration on either of the pieces. We use lucky hit chance to daze on one of the pieces and lucky hit chance to freeze on the pieces. How you distribute these 4 things is up to you and how your tempers land. But you want to make sure that you have only one of each of those. This is to ensure that we do not use Immobilize, for example, which will only decrease the time that mobs are not unstoppable, but do not benefit you in any further way. But we make sure that with Smoke Grenade duration, it also increases our stagger value that we deal to enemies without compromising the unstoppable downtime, basically. On the chest, we are going to use Ranks to Dark Shroud. This is very important because it significantly boosts our survivability. Whether you have armor on the chest or on the pants or on the boots does not really matter. You just have to make sure to distribute it somehow that you have armor on one piece. And if you don't have greater FX armor on one piece, you need to have a total armor temper to still cap out the armor above 9,230. As an aspect on the chest, we use Frostbitten. When you are farming and want to feel a bit more safe, you can also swap Frostbitten for Undying, which will allow you to stay alive a little bit easier. But I have found that it is not necessary as long as we have enough healing from Siphoning Strikes. This is something that's up to your preference. If you feel like you're dying a lot or you're too squishy and you're not healing enough, then slot in Undying instead of Frostbitten here. On the gloves, we want to use vulnerable damage and, as I said earlier, the lucky hit, one of the crowd control tempers. And we use Inner Calm here to increase our damage. When we're staggering bosses, for example, we stand still a lot. So the 3-second extra bonus that we gain when standing still is active there. But until then, 10% is also fine while walking around and shooting regular mobs. On the gloves here, we do not need greater FX attack speed when we have Masterworks to back that up. For example, I have Masterworks of attack speed on my ring, so I do not need the greater FX attack speed here. But if you want to make sure that you cap out the 13 frame per attack breakpoint, again, make sure to check the notes in the planner and make sure to check the attack speed breakpoint calculator to figure out how much attack speed you need exactly. This is basically a varying amount depending on where you have your attack speed creator affixes, where you have your attack speed masterworks. So make sure to check that out because it is a significant damage increase to lower your frames per attack to 13. On the pants we use plus ranks to Heartseeker. This is the most important role in the build in my opinion because it significantly increases the damage that our Heartseeker deals and thus also increasing our victimized damage because that is a damaged echo. On the pants we also have a very important defensive aspect which is Umbrus. This will give us Dark Shrouds whenever we land a lucky hit on a critical strike, and then it's a 60% chance. So with the amount of times that we're attacking per second, which is very, very fast, and the decent amount of crit chance that we have, given that we have crit chance on 2 of our items and also a lot from our skills, this is basically guaranteed to give us a Dark Shroud nearly on every single cast of Heartseeker because of our high lucky hit chance. So it's a very, very good defensive tool and it increases our defense significantly. And it also means that we do not need to run Dark Shroud on our skill bar. On the boots, we want to temper movement speed as well, just to make us as agile as possible. And here we want to have the concussive strikes aspect, which also lets us daze enemies and increases our damage dealt against them by 20%. Now, the most difficult piece to get right is probably the amulet in this build, because we want 3 passives on it. I personally have spent a lot of time trying to get this amulet to roll correctly and also to get this amulet in the first place. You want Creator FX Exploit, then you want to have Malice on it, because Malice is a very, very important damage multiplier for Victimize, and this is calculated into the vulnerable damage itself as well. And you want Frigid Finesse to deal more damage to enemies while they are frozen or on bosses when they are staggered. Exploit here is the most important passive to have because it is essentially double dipping with Victimize. Not only does it increase the damage you deal against the healthy and injured enemies, but that is just applied twice to the damage echo again. So it is an insanely strong passive which basically can, I think, double or even 2.5 times your damage if it is under the right circumstances. An amulet with passives will substantially increase your damage against most enemies, so it is very important to have. On the aspect here, we want to use adaptability. Adaptability is further used to increase our damage with basic skills. Heartseeker is a basic skill. For the masterworks here, you want to make sure that at least 2 of them land into exploit, and the third one then hopefully goes into exploit as well. Or on the other hand, going into one of the other passives is fine too. Then on the ring, we are using attack speed, crit chance, and lucky hit. And ideally you want agility cooldown reduction here. I did not get that, so I didn't get the perfect temper on this ring. But dash cooldown reduction or any of the other cooldown reductions that are in that tempering manual are also fine, so it's not really a brick if you don't get it. It's just a little bit more convenient if you have the agility cooldown reduction here. And as always, we want to temper vulnerable damage wherever possible. We want to use Rapid here to increase our basic skill attack speed, and we socket in different color gems to make sure we cap out our resistances. So that is Fire on the amulet, Lightning on one of the rings, and then finally Shadow on the last ring. Now on this ring we have one very important affix which I had to roll on. It is the lucky hit chance to make an enemy vulnerable for 2 seconds. This is one of the most important affixes on the build itself, because with this affix you make sure that enemies are always vulnerable when you hit them, because we have a high lucky hit chance, and the enemy is required to be vulnerable for Victimize to proc against them. If you do not have this affix, you can also use the Accursed Touch aspect. Make sure to have either of those two, ideally this affix, and then you always have the enemies vulnerable and they will blow up. Again, here I didn't get a guilty cooldown reduction, so I just had to settle for Shadow Step cooldown reduction, but again, vulnerable damage here is required as well. I'm using a poison resist and a cold resist ring to cap out resistances smoothly. If you do not have that combination of rings, you need to adjust the Paragon just a little bit to make sure you still cap the resistances. For the aspect here, we use Retribution, which is also a very strong aspect because it increases damage whenever a boss is staggered, and also when an enemy is knocked down by trick attacks. The Heartseeker build is a Victimize build, in which we utilize the Victimize key passive to deal massive damage to a vulnerable enemy upon a lucky hit and causing an explosion. This damage is then further scaled by vulnerable damage, so we have to make sure to temper that wherever possible. Our main activator for Victimize is Heartseeker, which is the build-defining ability. Heartseeker has a high innate lucky hit chance, and we use it to attack quickly and have multiple hits going into the enemy. We utilize Shadow Step to break crowd control whenever we can, or to engage from a safe distance. Then we utilize caltrops to not only increase our damage against enemies that are affected by it, but also gain critical strike chance. Caltrops duration here is affected by the Caltrops duration temper and also increases our total damage multiplier. We further use dash for more mobility and also use the enhanced dash upgrade to deal more damage against enemies when they're affected by it with critical strikes. We use trick attacks here to critically strike a dazed enemy to knock them down. This is important to activate our retribution aspect. We use smoke grenade to gain the benefit of our frostbitten aspect and also increase our damage against enemies who are affected by it. Important here are the ranks to Dark Shroud. Dark Shroud is our main defensive tool and massively increases our damage reduction. For the farming variant, we are opting for movement speed from Dark Shroud. In the pushing variant, we'll be using the additional critical strike chance. For the farming variant again, we are using Adrenaline Rush and Points in Haste to move more quickly around the pit. In the farming variant, we would drop this to pick up Reactive Defense. For our damaging passives, we use Weapon Mastery, Exploit, which is a very strong damage multiplier and is double dipping for Victimize, Malice, which is also a strong multiplier and is increasing our Victimize damage because it also increases the vulnerable damage, and Frigid Finesse to increase our damage against frozen enemies. We freeze enemies very regularly in this build, and it also works against staggered bosses, which is very important. For our specialization, we are using Inner Sight. We use Inner Sight because it gives us increased critical strike chance when it procs, and it is filled very easily with the amount of hits that we deal. For the Paragon board, we opt for a 7-board variant, where we try to fit in as many glyphs as we can, and also pick up many important legendary nodes that will increase our damage multiplicatively. This has changed a bit from previous seasons, where we used to go with fewer amounts of Paragon boards, where we try to max out the glyphs. In Season 4 going onward, a lot of that has changed because the value of legendary nodes has risen quite substantially. So we're trying to fit in as many nodes and glyphs as we can. We're going to start out with control on the starting board, making sure we reach the 25 intelligence. Breakpoint here to activate the secondary effect, path into exploit weaknesses where you pick up the cold resist and pick the exploit weaknesses legendary node. Then we swoop around to the glyph socket where we put in devious to increase our damage against crowd controlled targets and also boost up the vulnerable damage that is on the magic nodes here. Then we go out to the left into no witnesses where we put in pride to boost the maximum life node here, which substantially increases our defense, and pride also helps us against dealing physical damage against healthy and injured enemies. From exploit weaknesses we move up into cheap shot where we pick up the legendary node here, pick up some elite damage reduction and slot in the ambush glyph to increase our damage against enemies that are trapped. In this case our trap is caltrops. Then we go into Deadly Ambush here to increase our critical strike damage against enemies affected by traps. This node is actually bugged and it increases any damage against trapped enemies, so not only critical strike damage. We pick up some damage reduction from trapped enemies here as well and stock it in the exploit glyph, where we try to pick as many nodes as possible because vulnerable damage is our main damage scaler through the Victimize key passive. We pick up some poison resist here and also some maximum life, and then we go into Leyrana's Instinct, where we put in Fluidity to boost up our all resistances and also gain the bonus from Fluidity, which is a glyph that has been changed in the 1.4.3 patch to also increase your damage by 10% after you cast an agility skill. And finally we go into the Tricks of the Trade board, where we socket in our last glyph, which is Chip, which will increase any damage that we deal to an enemy after we dealt physical damage to them. We also pick up some damage to elites here and some armor.
time.